Good afternoon, Rotarians, guests, and friends. Welcome to those on Zoom as well. This is our September 30th Rotary Club of Cincinnati meeting, and we are so glad that you are here. We will begin with the National Anthem.
Hey, let's pray together. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to just simply be together and to enjoy this lunch has been prepared for us. May you bless this meal to our bodies and the conversation to our souls. Lord, and we also thank you for the power of storytelling, for they have the potential to inspire us, to challenge us, to give us hope, to provide us direction, to make us laugh, and sometimes even bring us to tears. I love this quote about storytelling, which says, "Stories are memory aids, instruction manuals, and moral compasses." Today we have the privilege to hear from John Kiesewetter as he tells some fantastic stories about our beloved Joe Knoxville, who is a treasure to our community for so many years. And we at the Rotary are especially thankful for Joe and his passion for Miracle Leagues and how impactful they have been for children and adults with disabilities through the decades. May John's words refresh our spirits today as we go out and as we strive to make an impact in our community and the world around us. Amen. Now let's all remember and put into practice and say together our four-way test. Is it the truth? To all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Next, we will have our prospective members, guests, and visitors introduced by Dr. Hux Miller, followed by our World Affairs Committee, an update from the co-chairperson, Chuck Martz.
Thank you, President Melinda. Welcome to Club 17, the 17th Rotary Club in the world. Our first guest is Jennifer Macht, and she is from Elite Notary Services. She's a guest of Jeff Wire, and she is Jeff's daughter-in-law. And then we have Adil Fardaheb, who is a mechanical engineer, a guest of Ariel Miller, and Adil has already worked many days and many hours at the Gamble Montessori School. Let's welcome Adil. And then we have Samantha Tribble from Samantha Tribble Studios. She is a graphic designer, and she's a guest of Melinda Kelly. And then we have Stephanie Sheard, who is a lifestyle and fashion influencer. She is a recovering pharmacist, and her company is Steph Style 101, and she's a guest of Steve King, and so far I don't think much fashion has been influenced on Steve King, but let's get Stephanie.
Good afternoon, Rotarians. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Chuck Martz, and I'm now the co-chair of the World Affairs Committee along with John Farmeyer. And we've got an exciting event coming up on November 10th. It's going to be our fundraiser. This year's focus is going to be on our Ghana project, which has been championed by before and Tony Ocheri for a number of years. But this year we're going to focus on raising funds for that event. It does a tremendous amount of good. It's going to be focused on books and desks. Over 500 books, I think, is what we're doing. 5,000, I'm sorry. I missed my zero. But it's going to do a tremendous amount of value. It's going to be a combined event, both virtual as well as in person, so that people that are comfortable with one or the other can come and go to that event. So you'll be hearing more about it, but we just wanted to get everybody to save the date, November 10th. I believe it's from 6 to 8 in the evening. And we have flyers that are being passed out. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those announcements. Next, we have Deanne Fleming, our Director of Membership. Give us a brief announcement regarding the Large Club Conference and a special project that we have going on sponsored by Club 17.
I think I've decided I want to be a membership influencer. That just sounds so much cooler, doesn't it? So I think I'm going to change my tag. So yes, I am here to talk membership, as you all know. That's why I come here to talk to you guys. Very important. So you ask me, how am I going to get somebody to come here and why would they want to come? Well, I have some very, very exciting news. So we have flyers. Commander Kirk Lippold was the commanding officer of the USS Cole when it came under suicide attack by the Al-Qaeda in the port of Aden, Yemen on October 12, 2000. He is our keynote speaker for the Large Club Conference, which is happening, we are hosting. There will be 110 executive directors coming from all over the United States. We're hosting them. We're going to be the best hosts. This is very important. This would be a great opportunity to bring a guest, and you bring them for free. So, Christy is passing out all the information about our speaker. I think it's important for all of our members to think about who they can invite and bring a guest prospective member. Club 17 will pay for their lunch, so you just have to let them know. And that is part of our Power of One program. Deanne Long will be passing these cards out at the door when you leave. And just to remind everyone, anytime you bring a guest, just let the office know, and that lunch is free. So, very important. I hope everyone will consider coming and listening to this very important speaker. I think that'll be good. Secondly, to celebrate World Polio Day, also part of the Large Club Conference, we are going to have the Purple Pinky Donut Project. And in conjunction with our partnership with Wyoming Bakery Pastry Shop, on Friday, October 22nd, is that right? No. Yes, I'm sorry. On Friday, October 22nd, you can purchase a box of donuts, a dozen donuts. They are going to be, they look like a finger, because I don't know how much you know about World Polio, but when they vaccinate, or inoculate, vaccinate. Is it a vaccination, Hux? It's a vaccinate, yeah. The child's pinky is painted purple, so that they know that signifies that they do have the vaccination. So in order to celebrate that day and give to the Rotary International Fund, each purchase of a box of donuts for $20, 100% contribution goes to the fund, and Club 17 is paying for the donuts. So, and you have lots of opportunities. One, you can have them delivered to your house as a part of hands-on service led by our Dr. Hux Miller. He will deliver those, or you can purchase the boxes and have them delivered to a fire department, a police department, a school, any place, a hospital, any place that you would like to donate those to. Or you can just have them purchased and brought to your house. So please fill out one of these. It's a great opportunity for a nice hands-on service project for our club, and it goes to a great fund. So thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you, Deanne. We have some additional announcements, but I will go through those pretty quickly so we can get to our program for today. We have several birthdays. September 28th, Joe Heineman. September 29th, Amanda Forsey. September 30th, Michelle Conklin. October 2nd, Mark Reckman. And October 4th, Bunny Meisel. Let's give our Rotarians a round of applause for birthdays. We're going to do things just a little bit differently today. We're going to do Split the Pot Now. Let's see. The winner today, the numbers whose ticket is drawn, will win $45, and everybody can be in that part of the Split the Pot contest. The big winner must come from Club 17, and the big pot today, accumulating pot, is $680.50. So we will ask John Kiesewetter to pull the ticket of the winner. So get your tickets ready. Let's see if we can get someone to win the big pot today. The last four digits are 9547. 9547. Oh, great. Okay, that's Rick Finley. Let's see if Rick can pull the Queen of Hearts to win the big pot of $680.50. What did he pull? Five of Hearts. Did not make the Queen of Hearts this time, so let's get ready for next week. Get your those change and dollar bills together for Split the Pot. Part of the proceeds from Split the Pot go to our membership development efforts, so know that that's how it's broken down. I won't go into the details now. And there's the Queen of Hearts that Christy is showing, that it was in the deck. Thank you, Christy. Next, we have printed. Our Rotary directories are being reprinted this year. So please make sure you review your information. Take a look at the latest one that you have. This is the latest one. And make sure that all of the information is correct in there regarding your company, your business address, spousal information. Christy would like any updates to that to be given to her, please, by Friday, October 15th. So we can be on schedule for the reprints of the directories. And remember, there's a lot of very good information in the directory, history of the club, so make sure you take time to go through and review it, the bylaws, past presidents, district information as well. Members in the news, happy 35th wedding anniversary to Club 17 Rotarians Jim Yunker and Don Yunker. Let's give them a round of applause. Last week, September 23rd, the Architectural Foundation of Cincinnati honored our Rotarian Allie Hubbard with the 2021 Volunteer of the Year Award. Let's give Allie a round of applause. Is Allie here? Let's see her sister. Congratulations. Allie is also the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development from Huseman Group, and also the Secretary of the Board of Trustees as AFC. Congratulations also to Rotarian Saban Taylor of DePaul Cristo Rey High School. She was inducted to this year's 40 under 40 class. So let's give Saban a round of applause. Recognizing young leaders and innovators in the greater Cincinnati area. We have one or two additional announcements here that I just received today. One is, of course, we still need to keep our Executive Director, Linda Muth, and her husband, Tom, in prayer. They did get some real good news recently. She sent a note to us saying that Tom's surgery on Monday, after that, they came through with the surgery. He came through with the surgery well, and they received miraculous news from his surgeon. The surgical team did not have to perform the Whipple procedure after all. The cancer was located far enough away from the pancreas and liver, so they were able to just remove the cancerous tissue part of his pancreas. He will still have to go through chemo to catch any stray cancer cells, but this was incredible news, and Linda was very excited and overjoyed and thanked the club and for the prayers and continued thoughts and cards. She was just really overjoyed and so appreciative of our club. So she asked for your continued prayers for she and, of course, for Tom, and that he will be released from the Cleveland Clinic by the weekend. And just continue your thoughts and prayers for Linda and Tom. The last announcement I have is related to the Jefferson Awards, and our two-time past president, Bill Shula, has done a lot with the Jefferson Awards. Let's give Bill a round of applause for all of his work through the years. So Katie Newsuit to find out if Cincinnati will again celebrate another national winner. The National Jefferson Awards ceremony will begin at 7:30 p.m. tonight, so don't miss it. Here's a short promotional video for the ceremony. To view the ceremony, listen carefully because we usually ask you to put your cell phones away so that we can have your full attention. And as Al Conscious mentioned, and your focus that I said earlier, but to view the ceremony, you can use your phone to take a picture of the link on the screen that Christy's going to show.
This award feels different, to be a part of the group dedicated to the we instead of the me. This salutes an individual's capacity for growth.
It is with my incredible pleasure and excitement that I get to share with you that you were one of the 5 Jack and Onassis Award recipients this year.
Oh my! Oh, it's not about me. It's just you want to do better for my community. My passion to help and to serve.
We can't wait to see how this community of change makers, doers, and optimists will come together and what they will continue to do in meaningful ways.
Christy, can you just rewind a little bit of it so they could get the picture again? Hold it right there. That would be great. Our meeting next week will be Nicholas Brees of Kroger, robotic fulfillment of e-commerce grocery orders. So we're looking forward to that program. But before we get to that, we are really excited because we have 3 new members to be introduced today by past President Brett LaBarre. We have a new corporate membership of 3, and well, I'll let Brett tell you about it, but there are 3 members, and they will have a corporate membership and will be joining our club. And past President Brett LaBarre will introduce each of our 3 new members, after which Nancy Reese will introduce our program speaker for today.
Thank you, President Melinda. And it's my pleasure to introduce 3 new members, as Melinda said, Becky Mcgilligan, Brian Mcgilligan, and Meredith McLean. And they're from Mcgilligan MD Inc., which is in Anderson Township. It's a direct primary care practice. So what I'll do is just say, and by the way, the Mcgilligans are also neighbors of mine in Anderson. I'm going to say a few words about each of them, and one of the things that would be easy to forget is they're all young professionals joining our club, which is a good thing. We really appreciate that as well. So Dr. Becky Mcgilligan grew up in South Point, Ohio, moved around a bit, went to the University of West Florida, graduated summa cum laude, and also met her husband Brian while they were at university there. And she went on to Florida State University College of Medicine, got a number of academic awards, including showing the most promise to be a high caliber physician. And from there, she came to Christ Hospital and did her residency in internal medicine. And when she finished her residency, she went into practice in Anderson. And after that point, as she reflected on how she wanted to be a primary care physician, she and Brian together decided to set up their own direct primary care practice, which is what they run. And Becky is the CEO of the practice and the chief physician. And they have 2 children, Zoe and Max. Becky has a number of hobbies, although probably doesn't have a lot of time with medicine to pursue them, but enjoys being on Peloton, being with the family, doing some reading, and as she gets the opportunity, and she's looking forward to more of this community service, which is why they're joining Rotary. So please join me in welcoming Becky Mcgilligan to Rotary Club Cincinnati. And I mentioned Brian Mcgilligan also went to the University of West Florida. He was a computer science major. When he left there, he took other opportunities in software engineering and software development, including a position at Raytheon in Florida. And when they moved up here for Becky's residency, he did some additional work in software engineering and then set up his own company, which was an e-commerce website development company. So Brian has an extensive background in software. He is also the vice president now and practice director for Mcgilligan MD, Inc., and has a number of interests. He also is interested in community service, but he also would like to be able to network with others who are running companies and share and collaborate in ways that would be helpful. He likes to travel, he likes technology, and like his wife, they enjoy their time as a family. Please join me in welcoming Brian Mcgilligan to our club. And I didn't mention you're from South Jersey, by the way, and I used to live there too, in that area, Berlin, New Jersey. And Meredith McLean grew up here in Hyde Park. Meredith is the practice coordinator at Mcgilligan MD, Inc. She has a history of being involved in different community service activities, been involved in the Cancer Support Network, also involved in Hospice of Cincinnati, is on an advisory committee to hospice. She went to Xavier University. She's also a resident of Anderson Township and married to Sean and husband Sean. So Meredith McLean, we welcome you to Rotary Club of Cincinnati. Thank you very much.
Hello, Club 17 and our guests. I have a public service announcement from the new member advisor committee before I introduce John. Do you remember the very first days that you were a member of our club? And like a little overwhelming to walk in this room and see 100+ people, or be handed a list of 40 committees you could join, or wonder how you're possibly going to have a life if you just attend everything at Rotary. And so we have a program called New Member Advisors that help our new members get acclimated to our club. We're looking for some people that just can't wait to share Rotary with their fellow new members. So next Thursday, the 7th of October, 10/7, after our lunch meeting at 1:30, we are going to have a meeting. Mike Schmidt, who's the chair of the committee, is going to chair that meeting and just tell you a little more about being a new member advisor and what it takes. So please pay attention to the raise next week and look for the place for that meeting. Thank you. Now, to the best part, I get to introduce our speaker. John Kiesewetter. For more than 3 decades, John has been the Cincinnati authority on TV, broadcasting, and media. His stories, columns, and blogs have covered national and local broadcasting news and personalities for the Cincinnati Enquirer, Cincinnati Public Radio's NPR affiliate, WVXU, and since 2015, WVXU.org. John grew up in Middletown as a huge Reds fan. His favorite player was fellow lefty Hamilton Joe Nuxall. John lives in Fairfield with his wife, Sue, who is a freelance reporter for the Enquirer. They have 3 adult sons. Please give a very generous Cincinnati Rotary Club welcome to John Kiesewetter. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for that introduction. Although I was promised Michael Schatzman would do it. But he's not here today. Maybe it's me. And I thank the Rotary for having me come here today You know, Marty Brenneman has said that for years that Joe Knoxall was the most iconic sports figure in Cincinnati, bigger than Oscar Robertson, bigger than Pete Rose, and I didn't disagree. But since I released this book, Joe Knoxall, The Old Left-Hander and Me, 3 weeks ago, I've seen plenty of evidence that Joe Knoxall is the sports icon, the most beloved sports figure, because everybody seems to have a story about Joe Knoxall. Most people talk about they might have met him at a restaurant or around town, and he gave him an autograph. Those that played golf with him will tell me stories, and maybe a story about Joe throwing a club, maybe two. Tom Browning in the book told me about the day he played with Nux, and Joe threw every club in his bag. So here's my story. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. That's me. I don't know how we do this. You look at me or look at that. But that's me holding the Enquirer at 8 years old, 1961, when the Reds went to the World Series. I played Little League Baseball in Middletown, and I had to play first base or outfield because I was left-handed. So the next year, 1962, my Reds, who were the National League champs, were mired in fourth place behind the Dodgers, the Giants, and the Padres. And in July, they called up this left-handed pitcher, Hamilton Joe Knoxall, from the minors. And Knoxall relieved Jim Maloney in the fourth inning in a game in July. He pitched 3 1/3 innings. He also hit a 2-run double in the sixth for the go-ahead runs. So the Reds won the game, and he was the winning pitcher. And he was 1 for 2, ended up hitting .500 for that game. And Knoxall went 5-0 that year for the Reds. And so being only 9, I thought Knuxie was some young stud pitcher who percolated up to the Reds farm system like Jim Maloney and Jim O'Toole. So my dad set me straight. He told me about Knoxall's pitching for the Reds at 15 years old in 1944 during the war, the youngest player in Cincinnati in Major League Baseball history. This is an illustration of Knoxall pitching to Musial at Crosley Field on June 10th, 1944, done by C.F. Payne, world-renowned artist who's grew up in Wyoming and has done a lot of magazine covers. He did this for the Knoxall Foundation annual Knoxall Ball about 3 years ago. So anyway, my dad set me straight. He told me that Nux in 1962 was 34 years old. He told me that how after he made his debut in 1944, he spent 7 years in the minor leagues to make it back to the Reds. Then when he came back to the Reds, he was an all-star in 1955 and 1956. And so this little lefty had found his hero, and I took my Joe Knoxall Topps card and put it in a little gold frame. I put it on my dresser. It's still there today. I'm not saying my wife is happy about it, but it's still there. So let me fast forward to 1986. I had been at the Enquirer 10 years, and I stepped down as the Enquirer's tempo section editor. Some of you might remember when we had a tempo section, and became TV radio columnist. And I expanded the typical TV radio beat to include sports broadcasting. And so, you know, the Enquirer had sent me to the LA probably about 36 times over a 20-year stretch to look at fall shows, interview executives and all. But to me, my favorite trip for the Enquirer was going to the radio booth and watching Marty and Joe call a game. This is a photo I took in 1999. The man in the white shirt is Marty. In the blue shirt, that's Knuxie, and he's throwing a ball that came back to the booth down to the green seats. And to the far right is Bill Seg Dennison, and you can barely see him on the left is the guy they called Yid, Dave Yiddy Armbrister, who's the engineer for the broadcast. So anyway, I built a home in Fairfield in 1986, and so my sons and I would run into him around town. This is from 2004. That's my youngest son, David, on the left, and Joey on the right with Nux in Hamilton. And we'd run into him at store openings, at the Joe Knoxall driving range where he had a miniature golf. And every year at Christmas, when they did the tree lighting at Fairfield, and the fire truck would bring Santa in to light the tree, Nux would be there. And then Nux would go into the council chambers with Santa and help Santa pass out candy canes to every kid that came by. So one year I snuck up behind Joe and said, Joe, can I get you a beer? And he looked at me and said, no, I don't think the kids should see me drinking. But by the look in his eyes, he really wanted a bud. So after I moved to Fairfield, my neighbor across the street said, hey, let's go to the KSC meeting tonight. Joe Nuxall's speaking. And every year he'd come and talk and tell these wonderful stories. And he'd start out by telling us about the Reds. This would be in January before spring training. And every year he'd talk about that obligatory overview, you know, how the Reds are going to do. And then somebody would say, Joe, tell us about the old days. And he'd start telling these stories about his playing days. And most of them would end up with his temper tantrums or temper explosions, kind of like this one. This was in 1964. This picture was taken minutes before he was tossed out for questioning balls and strikes. To the far right is Fred Hutchison, who was a manager of the 61 team. This was 64, and he was ravaged with cancer and died later that year. So anyway, without notes, Joe would tell these stories for like an hour and a half. He told great stories like Jim Maloney and Gaylord Perry getting into a spitball duel at Candlesticks Park. He talked about how back in 1965, the first year of the Astrodome, he took a no-hitter into the 8th inning. And he told me that was one of his regrets because if he got those last 5 outs, he would have had the first indoor no-hitter in the history of baseball. But Bob Lillis singled cleanly with 1 out in the 8th. And then he told another story about the time that he was playing in Wrigley Field, and it was after a brief rain delay and the grass was wet. And he walked the batter, and the next Cubs hitter bunted on him. And he went down to field the ball, and when he went to pick it up, he fell on his butt. So the next batter came up, and of course the Cubs bunted on him again. He went to pick it up, fell down on his butt. He said, you take all those bunts together, and they wouldn't have made it to third base. And if he stood on his feet, he'd be okay. So anyway, after the bases are loaded, Ernie Banks hits a double, and then the next guy up singles, and out comes Bertie Tebbetts to take him out of the game, and Joe's just fuming. He's just exploded. In fact, the Enquirer headline says, Nuxall pops cork was the headline. So he kicked the batting helmets, he scattered the bats, he tried to tear up his glove, and then he went to the clubhouse, and what the fans at Wrigley didn't see was he, back then they had a big long box about this big that the batting helmets would come in, and he kicked it, and it stuck to his foot. He said, I had this great big long box stuck to my foot, and I couldn't get it off. Finally, the clubhouse guys took it off me. He says, that was one of my most embarrassing moments. I tore up my glove, stuck my foot through the box, and it was crazy, and it didn't help a damn thing. So here's Joe getting it into an umpire yet again. So he'd tell these stories for like an hour or an hour and a half until the program chair stood up and said, time for one last question, or more than likely the person said, we've run out of beer. And he told all of them, but none of them were in his book that he wrote back in 2004 with Greg Hord. So I got the idea that that was the original inspiration for my book, that I wanted to preserve these stories, prize them, and pass them on to a next generation. And that's why I'm giving $1 a book to the Joe Nuxall Foundation, which has the Joe Nuxall Miracle League fields up in Fairfield in his honor. And to the right is the Joe Nuxall Memorial Golf Scholarship outing. Since 1985, the Joe Nuxall Memorial Scholarships have handed out nearly $900,000 to high school seniors in Butler County. And this is in the name of a guy who some of us thought couldn't speak real good English or never went to college. And then the other thing is the Miracle League fields, and if you've never been up there, I encourage you to get up there. This is the Miracle Leagues. In the upper photo, you can there's a video board on each of the fields, and that's upper left corner of the top photo is Nux waving to everybody. Again, C.F. Payne did that one for the fields there. And to the right of the bottom photo is kids playing, but thanks to Nuxall's legacy, people, not kids, from 4 to 74, about 250 a year, play the game that Nux loved, that they thought they might not be able to play. And there's a video board at each one because when each kid comes to bat, there's an announcer who announces their name and puts their face on the video screen, just like the big leagues. So anyway, Knucksy's stories were my first chapter. But whenever I interviewed Nux, I'd always record him on my old school cassette handheld recorder. And we'd talk about, so I'd get him to talk about, repeat some of these stories so I would have them on tape. And he'd tell me stories about Kozuski and many stories about working with Marty and Joe. That's Marty with his helmet hair. You've seen that photo probably many times before, but it's cropped out of this photo, which is from the first day Joe met Marty. Marty's first day on the payroll was February 1st, 74, and there was a promotional event in Dayton, so they took Marty to Dayton and to a photo studio, and that's where the two of them met, and that's where this picture's from. So, you know, when Marty retired, they made a big deal about saying he was 46 years. It was the 150th anniversary of the club, how he was there for 46 years. Well, Knucksy was associated with Reds for more than 60. And if you account for all the times Marty kept talking about Joe after he passed, all the way to the last week, because Brantley asked him to tell him some favorite Nuxall stories. So that's like 1944 to 2019. That's 75 years, or half the franchise that Joe had a presence. So when I went through the transcripts of stuff, I found that I had a lot of stories. Marty was very generous with his time. And what I didn't have from Joe and Marty, I also spoke to Bench, Foster, Tom Browning, Brantley, Welsh, Oster, the clubhouse managers Rick and Mark Stowe, Dave Yiddy, Armbruster, and of course Don Zetta, Joe's widow, and their sons Kim and Phil. And there's also other stories that I blended in from past interviews and stuff that I'd done with, like George Clooney about his Reds tryout 2 times in Lexington, Pete Rose, Lou Piniella, Jonathan Winters, and this famous rain delay that they were in a rain delay, and Winters was in the park, and he came up and he played some character like he was a pitcher for the 1919 Reds, and just went on. And so later, like years later, I interviewed him in LA, and I said, "Do you remember that?" And he said, "Oh yeah." And I was this, and so he told me he was this. He told me a whole different story, but it was just as funny. But I mean, so I didn't know if he was putting me on or he just really didn't, or just made it all up. I wrote chapters about his transition to radio. That's him with Al Michaels in 1971, their first year. Al was 26. I did a thing about his Star of the Game interviews. That's Joe interviewing Johnny Bench at Johnny Bench Night, 1983. I wrote a lot about one chapter about the instances that between Dick Wagner, Marge Schott, and others that Marty and Joe might not have made 31 years together, including all of Marty's job offers. And my favorite chapter is about the pranks that Marty and Joe played on each other in the booth. This is when the Reds clinched the pennant in '79. That's Bench throwing some champagne on Dick Wagner and Joe Nuxall as Nux is trying to interview Dick Wagner. There was also, among the pranks, there was a time that they rigged the press box intercom so it was only heard in the press box, I mean in the Reds booth and not everywhere else. And Joe Nuxall was paged to go to the press box for a long distance call in the first inning. And he gets down there and nobody knows has heard of it. And he paged again in the second inning, and the third inning, and the fourth inning. And as Marty says, the 5th inning had happened. Joe went down there to kill somebody. There's also the time that when they were in Florida back before spring training moved to Arizona, they had gone to to cover a spring training game in the Dodgers and came back through Yeehaw Junction to go back to Tampa and Plant City. And Joe wanted to buy a 6-pack at the carryout, and they carded him. They never let him forget that one. And another story that's in there is, this is from this actual picture's not in the book, but 1979, Sports Illustrated did a story about Nuxall still pitching batting practice. There, I think he was 58 at the time. And it upset Dick Wagner. You'd think he'd be happy about having a national feature in a national magazine about Knucksy, but Knucksy had said in there that when he gets home from the ball game and he likes to unwind, he gets a pound of Colby cheese, some crackers, and a 6-pack of Michelob, and watches Johnny Carson. True story. So Wagner hauls him in and says, "Don't you realize that Stroh's is our sponsor, not Michelob?" And he was even more upset with Marty because of one sentence, and I don't know if you can read it from back here or not, but it said, "While Brenneman reads a book, not about baseball, of course, Nuxall broadcasts the middle innings," which was true. Marty is a big reader, and he used to read on the bus going back and forth, but when he wasn't calling the game, he'd have his headphones on and listen to Joe, but he'd read a book, he'd read a novel. So he gets summoned to Wagner's office, and Marty walks in, and there's the magazine open on Dick Wagner's desk. And Dick goes, "Is this true?" And Marty said, "Yes." And Wagner says, "I never want to hear about this again. It's very unprofessional. I don't want you to do it again, period." And Marty had told me later, he said, "I had a lot of knockdown, drag-down arguments with Dick Wagner, but he had me on this one, so I didn't bother." So anyway, 2 weeks later, the Reds go into Montreal. They go into Montreal, and Joe pulls the broadcasting engineer for the visitors aside. He said, "Look, when I lean back in my chair and put my hands back behind my head, you cut off the microphones, and then you cue Marty like 30 seconds early before you're really supposed to come out of a commercial break." So after the second inning, going into the third, Nux leans back and puts his hands behind his head, and the engineer cues Marty, and Marty said, "Welcome back to Montreal, and now for the third inning, here's Joe Nuxall." And Nux looked over at him and says, "Hey, Marty, what book are you reading today?" And Marty told me he thought his whole career had flashed in front of him, and called him every name in the book off the air. And Nuxie was so gloated about this, but he didn't tell me that story like 20 years later, and he was still beaming that he finally got Marty. So the other person that this story made a big influence on is David Letterman. Letterman grew up in Indianapolis, big Reds fan, and used to come down to Crosley Field by train with his dad to see Clue and Frank Robinson. So anyway, we fast forward to 2002, so that's like, you're forcing me to do math. 23 years later, he had Dick Enberg on his show, the CBS Late Show. So in the warm-up, in the opening with his monologue, he talked about how he was blessed to have great radio announcers that he listened to, Al Michaels with Joe Nuxall, Vin Scully in LA, and Dick Enberg. And then he started telling the people about Joe's after-game treat, that he always got a pound of Colby cheese, some crackers, and a 6-pack of beer, and I had to get some more because he ran out of one or the other. So then fast forward to 2017, this is a Letterman at Great American Ballpark, and to the left is Jim Day. He was interviewed when he and his friend, a comedy writer named Bill Sheff, came to Great American Ballpark. And while they're being interviewed by Jim Day, they start talking about Joe Nuxall drinking a 6-pack of beer, eating a pound of Colby cheese. So 38 years later, this thing's still stuck with Letterman. So the book has 18 chapters, and I even wrote one about Marty and Joe's Kroger commercials. Part of the fun of my research is somebody from the production company gave me a jump drive with like 35 Marty and Joe Kroger commercials, and they were just brilliant because this was in 1984, and Kroger became a sponsor, and the advertising director at Kroger said, well, he wanted to do Marty and Joe, and the Chicago-based advertising agency said, no, you want to get a player. And St. Gimri says, well, let's see, by 1984, Bench is retired, Rose was gone, Foster's gone, Seaver's gone, Morgan's gone, Eastwick and McEnany are gone, so that left Davey Concepcion, Danny Dreesen, and Marty and Joe. So they went with Marty and Joe, and they did about 8 or 10 years of commercials. And I argue it really made them cultural icons, so at least in Cincinnati, that they weren't just Marty and Joe on the radio, but they were this great comedy team. Great comedy team doing these very well done spots, pitching cost cutter savings for the hometown grocery store. So even though Joe would tell these hilarious baseball stories about his playing days and his explosive tempers, his pitching accomplishments get overlooked. So I did a whole chapter, kind of a serious look at his pitching, because he was no joke on the mound. When he retired in 1967, he led the Reds with appearances by a pitcher and by the most strikeouts by a Reds pitcher, since passed by Maloney and Soto and others. He also held the record for 15 years as a pitcher for the Reds that still exists today, almost 55 years later. He still has that record. And then you think about the record he set by being 44, in 1944, when he was only 15, pitching for the Reds. He only got 2 outs, and then he got lit up by Stan Musial, and the wheels fell off, and they had to go get him. Then he spent 7 years in the minors, which at that point was like 1/3 of his life before he came up at age 22. And then he came back up at age 52 and did pretty well. Or as somebody pointed out, it only took him 8 years to get the 3rd out. So he made the club in 52 despite having a losing record in the minors and having walked more than he struck out. And he went back to Muncie, where he had pitched in 1947 for the Class D League. That's where he met Wally Post. And that year, he was 7-7 and had 119 strikeouts, but 145 walks. So he went back there in the 70s when he was on the radio, and he told him, he said, "I was about as wild as a pitcher as you ever saw. I remember one game when I walked 14 guys, struck out 13, hadn't given up a hit, but the other team was winning 4-2. And it was only the 7th inning." So he had 2 really great seasons, 8 years apart. He was 17-12 in 1955 when he went to the All-Star game in 26. And he was 15-8 in 63 at age 34 after being released by the Los Angeles Angels and spending 2 months in the minors. So after the 63 season, the Cincinnati baseball writers gave him the Comeback of the Year award, Comeback Player of the Year award. And so he goes to the banquet, I think it was in this very hotel, and he brought down the house, he said, "You know, I hope I don't win this award again." He was also a decent hitter. He hit 15 home runs, including one off of Whitey Ford in Yankee Stadium. He hit 3 triples, which would have liked to have seen one of those. He knocked in 78 runs over 16 years, and he stole 2 bases, including stealing second off of Sandy Koufax in Crosley Field in 1964, and he won the game, a complete game, 1-0 game over Koufax in Crosley Field. 2 of his home runs came in 1956. In 1956, the Reds tied the National League record with 221 home runs. And it also that was a first winning record since the 1940 World Series. And it was the first time the Reds ever went over 1 million because of all this hype around the going for the 221 home runs. And that's the 1956 Sports Illustrated. That's Wally Post on the left, Clue with his cut-off sleeves in the back, and Gus Bell in the front, the grandfather of the current manager, David Bell. So anyway, they hit 221 home runs, and Clue hit, and Nuxie hit 2 of them. So I also had some good stories about Clue in the book. In one game, Nuxall had walked the bases loaded, and he's like 3-0 on the batter. And Clue calls timeout and starts walking to the mound to give Nux some encouragement. And Nux looks at him, waves him off, and says, "Go back to play first base. I'm doing the pitching." And Clue glares at him and says, "Oh yeah? When you gonna start?" So I never saw Clue hit because Big Clue was traded in 57 when I was 4 years old. But I did see him field once in my living room. That's Clue at my home in Middletown. He had a speech to make in Middletown at the Manchester Motor Inn, and my dad wrote a letter, longhand, to Clue and said, "If you make it up to our house, I'll make sure you get to the hotel on time. My son is a left-handed first baseman." Maybe you can get him some pointers. So I'm in the plaid shirt behind Clue. That's my two older sisters and my brother closing his eyes. So I have digitized about 30 seconds of home movies of Clue doing some footwork and fielding imaginary ground balls in my living room. So in 2006, the year before he died, this is another chapter, I sat him down and said, okay, who's your all-time favorite Reds lineup, from the players you played with to the players you watched from the booth? So 60 years of Reds. So like one question was, who's your favorite first baseman? Is it Clue? Or is it Tony Perez? Is it Lee May? Is it Sean Casey, who was like a son to Knucksy? So I won't give away that chapter, but I will give you one hint right there. That's Joe with Griffey. So the other thing about Nux that set him apart, and it made a separate chapter, when he was very instrumental and very helpful to the Big Red Machine because he pitched batting practice. And from the day he retired from the booth on April 1, 1967, the next day he started throwing BP. And he threw BP for about 20 years, all the way to after Pete Rose came back as manager in '85. And so when you think about it, all you people that watch a baseball game on TV and you see all these former pitchers as analysts, whether it's John Smoltz, Ron Darling, Orel Hershiser, Jim Palmer, Don Drysdale, Brantley, Chris Welsh, even Wade Hoyt and Dizzy Dean, none of those guys pitched batting practice. But Joe was out there every day pitching batting practice. And Bench said that he was a big asset when they'd be facing a left-handed pitcher from the Dodgers or Steve Carlton of the Phillies. Okay, I'll be quick. Anyway, so they said he wasn't the same speed, but you could catch the motion coming out of the hands and how helpful it was. And Foster said he loved facing Knucksy because Knucksy could put the ball wherever he wanted, and it was great batting practice. Foster hit in 1977 was the MVP. He had 49 home runs. So I once asked him, I asked Nux, I said, what if Foster played in Great American Ballpark? And he said, goodness gracious, he might have hit 55 or 60 home runs. Foster would bang him off the scoreboard, I bet, I guarantee it. So I've got can I one more story, and then I'll be, okay, one more story. So I want to leave time for questions, but I want to tell Nuxie's favorite story because he told it all the time. So it was about the time back in 1966, Gaylord Perry, the spitball artist, was pitching against the Reds, and Jim Maloney was pitching for the Reds. Candlestick, Joe's last year. So Gaylord Perry is throwing spitters all the time, and the Reds batters were very frustrated, and so was manager Dave Bristol. And Bristol pulled Maloney inside and said, I know you can throw a spitter, why don't you throw yours? And Maloney said, no, I don't want to do it. And Bristol kept on getting on him. He said, fine, okay, if I go up to bat and Maloney throws me a spitter, then Gaylord Perry throws me a spitter, I'll start throwing mine. So sure enough, Maloney gets up there, on the third strike, it's a spitter that drops off the table. So the next inning, Maloney starts throwing his spitter. And the Giants manager goes nuts. He's in the dugout, his name's Herman Franks, Maloney throws a spitter, he goes, what was that? What was that? He's throwing a spitter, what was that? Every time Maloney threw a spitter, Herman Franks would go, yell at the umpire, what was that? What was that? Finally, about the eighth inning, Maloney throws one to Willie Mays. Willie Mays, it drops off the table. Willie Mays about comes out of his shoes swinging. Herman Franks explodes and says, what was that? What was that? The home plate umpire takes off his mask, looks over to the Giants dugout and said, I don't know what it was, but it's the best one I've ever seen. So that's it. I don't know, do we have time for questions? Or 2 questions, okay. Any questions? Whoop, hang on. Phil Donahue will bring you a microphone.
When did Nuxall come back with the saying, the old left-hander rounding third and heading for home?
His very first season, he was only on the radio for the first month or two, and a third base coach by the name of Whitey Wiedelman suggested it. And so he started saying it. And he said, God, this sounds way too corny. And he stopped saying it after a week or so. And then he started getting all this mail from people who loved it. And so he began saying it again. And it did for the rest of his life. And it's on the top of the Reds offices down on Joe Nuxhall Way and inside the Reds Hall of Fame. I guess by popular demand. Sir. Another question?
Okay.
You're going to let me off?
That's good. Thank you very much. Stay right there.
Okay.
Thank you very much, John. We have a Rotary pin for you that has our theme on it for the year that's served to change lives. And we will also give a donation for the eradication of polio, which Rotary International and the clubs have been in progress with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation since the 1980s. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great stories about Joe Nuxall and the Reds. And John will be after later with his books, and also if you have some additional questions, we want to be timely on our schedule, as we know people have other events afterwards, so we could have just listened to him for another 30 more minutes. Let's give him another round of applause. Our next meeting, again, will be Nicholas Brace of Kroger, Robotic Fulfillment, and E-commerce grocery orders. That will be next week, back right here in the Hilton, Netherlands. We're glad to be back. We had a road show last week, but that was a great event too. So we're looking forward to coming back next week. We have several meetings this afternoon as well. We have new member orientation meeting today in the boardroom 4 on the mezzanine level. We have the World Affairs Committee meeting, boardroom 3, also on the mezzanine level. Past President panel will be meeting on the mezzanine level, also in boardroom 1 on that floor. We also have the Speech Contest Committee meeting today. It's a great committee. We have Lori Quinlivan and Ed Mathis, who are co-chairpersons of that committee. Let's give them a round of applause as they start that process this year. That committee will be meeting in the Julep Room on the 3rd floor. So thank you so very much for coming today. And we look forward to next week. Let's make sure we do, as our international president says, grow one, each one, bring one. So see who you can invite, bring to our club. Thank you for our guests and members today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Make it a great week. Meeting adjourned.